Welcome to Making a Dairy-Free Diet Easy to Follow, some tips and tricks. And I'm Marianne Williams. I'm a dietetic advanced clinical practitioner working for Somerset NHS Foundation Trust, and I'm going to take us through the webinar today. Now, I find that when I'm seeing patients and I'm wanting them to follow a dairy-free diet, it can be quite confusing, and although we'll give sheets and information, I think this webinar will really help. And we're very lucky today to have Tanya Wright, who's a specialist allergy dietitian. And in fact, she's really well placed personally and professionally to be here talking to us today, because she herself suffers from anaphylaxis to dairy and eggs and has done since her early 20s. She works for the Tertiary Allergy Service at St Mary's Hospital, Imperial College Healthcare Trust in London. So welcome, Tanya. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello.
I just want to make a point of who this webinar is useful for. And I want you to know that this webinar is for patients who've been advised to follow a dairy-free diet by their healthcare professional, but it is absolutely not suitable for those who have a history of anaphylaxis or reactions to trace amounts of dairy. And I really can't stress that enough. A lot of the information we'll give today would not be suitable for those with a severe history of dairy allergy. So this information is a guide. We'll give useful tips for following a dairy-free diet, but we won't be covering medications or allergy testing. And there is, in fact, a separate webinar on the website specifically on the myths around allergy testing. And if you want to know more about allergy testing, I'd really recommend that you watch that webinar. And that webinar, there are two allergy professors talking about allergy testing. So I think you'll find it extremely useful. So what we're going to cover in this webinar today are practical pointers, shopping, cooking, eating out, easy mistakes, and a couple of frequently asked questions at the end. And we'll try and keep it as short and succinct as we can, just to give you some of those useful tips. So I'm going to start now by asking Tanya to look at shopping tips in particular. So what about the dairy alternatives that are out there at the moment? Because a few years ago, there weren't many available, were there, Tanya? And now what do you find? Is there a lot more available?
There's definitely a lot more available, partly because more people seem to be following special allergy diets, and other people who are just having a lifestyle choice for plant-based foods, which includes dairy alternatives. So there's so many more options, so many more flavors, different companies popping up all over the place, making lovely products.
Okay, that's brilliant. And what about the reading the food labels? Because I noticed that quite often you'll go to the free from section in the supermarket, and if you're dairy free, you'll assume that everything in that section is dairy free. So is it really important to read those food labels, I imagine?
It's so important to read food labels, and when you do, you'll actually realize that in the free from section, that's covering other diets as well. So some products might just be gluten free and they may contain dairy. So for example, the gluten-free pizza is in the free from section, but it has a dairy cheese topping. So reading labels is really important. You could go to the other shelves in the supermarket thinking that everything else has milk in. You read a label and realize that actually it doesn't. And later on, we can show you some products in this presentation of things that you thought you could not eat, but you actually can.
Oh, that's it. Very interesting. So what about the may contain warnings? With patients that this webinar is aimed towards who aren't anaphylaxis and don't have severe reactions to very trace amounts, do they need to worry unduly about may contain warnings?
Well, no, they actually don't need to worry about it. So we call this precautionary labelling. It might say may contain a trace of milk or made in a factory using milk. In fact, actually, if you haven't got the severe allergy to milk, foods really are very unlikely to cause a problem. If for any reason they do cause a problem, then just avoid them. But certainly, I wouldn't be expecting you to cut out all foods with this precautionary labelling.
So what about when you're shopping, making shopping lists and sorting out your meals beforehand? Because I know that a lot of people really struggle at home because they may be the only one at home on a dairy-free diet and they suddenly feel they've got to cook two different meals, or it's just very complicated at home. What would be your advice there?
I think that it's easy to get yourself in a pickle and think, oh, what am I going to eat? I can't have the same. I'm spending all this time cooking. Actually, when you really look at it, most recipes are easily adapted. You can easily make mashed potato or lasagnas or soups that actually don't have any dairy in, and you can use the replacement dairy-free products for those to make them really similar to the usual dairy-containing foods. And people actually be surprised how much they enjoy the food or don't even notice that you've made those substitutions.
And actually, when you're eating sort of something like you're drinking a glass of dairy-free milk, it's going to taste very different to how it might taste when it's cooked into a lasagna sauce, etc., isn't it?
Oh, completely. And it's unlikely that people will even notice, to be honest.
Okay. And what about storing for future use? So, if you've got something you found in a supermarket, you think, oh, this is fantastic, but you may not go to that supermarket very often, and you want to make sure you've got it for future. Would you suggest sort of almost bulk buying it and keeping it to one side?
Absolutely. Check first whether it's a product that you can just keep in the store cupboard, or if it's something that has a shelf life on it of a few weeks, and then definitely buy up a few weeks worth or months worth of that product, because you won't have to keep visiting the shops. You'll have enough to use for the whole family. It just makes managing everything so much easier.
Okay. And what about social life eating? Because obviously a lot of people say to me, well, what am I going to do when I go out and eat? Am I not going to be able to socialize ever again? And what would be your advice there?
I think it's really difficult because we go out and socialize to relax and have fun and enjoyment. And what the last thing you want to be doing is worrying all night about, oh gosh, what can I have? What's this? What's that? Am I going to be ill? Actually, turn it round the other way and say, okay, so I'll either speak to the person that's cooking the food, I'll maybe take something for myself that I can eat, or double check with the person who's running the venue or the restaurant, communicate with them, work out what's going on, and then you can relax and enjoy yourself.
And a lot of chefs are extremely good at making changes to their menu for people that have got particular dietary needs. And I think if they've got plenty of warning and they know you're coming and they know what you need, they're normally extremely good at sorting that out.
Absolutely.
And I think problems sometimes come with friends who are trying their best and they're being absolutely wonderful, and they think they've taken everything out, but they haven't realized that something they've used wasn't suitable. So I would say that, you just perhaps in those environments, maybe take your own food with you. So you can socialize and join everybody. You can just pop it in their microwave, heat it up, and you can join everybody else and have a drink and socialize, but you've taken your own food. Would you suggest that that's possibly a good idea?
I think so. I think if you're having a cinema night, everyone else is going to have popcorn. You can get your own little bag of popcorn that you know is okay. Or if everyone's having a takeaway Chinese and you're a bit worried about it, then you can get a Chinese from the supermarket and heat it up. If you're eating out, you can ask for the allergen menu and speak to the chef, and it just cuts the risks down. And that's all you want to do, so that you can just be safe and just relax and have a nice time without worrying about being ill all the time.
And what about the treats basket? I think that's such a good idea, because often when we're on these restricted diets, we feel really denied. We feel like all the enjoyment of life is being taken away, because food is a very important part of enjoying life. So I noticed you put treats basket. What do you mean by that?
I think probably the treats basket is one of the most important things. We all want to feel like we're not missing out. We like to have something that makes us feel good, something to enjoy. And just because you've got an allergy to milk or you're avoiding milk and dairy shouldn't mean you can't join in. So actually have a cupboard or a basket or a lock away, and that's your little store. And when everyone else is having nice things, or even if you're on your own and you want a treat, you've got all your treats there, and you're not going to sit there and feel really miserable that you can't have something enjoyable. So yeah, keep it positive. It's not hard to manage the dairy-free diet. Put all these tips into place when you're shopping, when you're cooking, and it makes a big difference to feeling really normal and an enjoyment of food again.
Absolutely. No, that's very good advice. And I think some classic examples of some confusing products. So when you're shopping, can you explain to us this particular product?
Yes, I think people are always very surprised when they see this. So these are two products. They're both coconut juice drinks. The one on the left is completely dairy-free, and the one on the right contains dairy. By looking at the packaging, you wouldn't know this. Had you read the ingredient label, it would become apparent immediately. So this just brings home the point that double check the ingredients, and then you're not going to have a problem. You're not going to have reactions.
The Bird's traditional custard powder in the tub is dairy-free. In the instant custard powder on the other side in the packet is not. So you would think that if you bought the tub and it was fine, you would just pick up the instant custard powder and assume it's the same, but it's not. And here we've got original stalk baking block. The baking block is fine, but the one in the tub is not. So the kilogram tub there, that does have dairy in. And finally, we've got here, for instance, Tesco's Finest Chicken and Thyme Hand-Cooked Crisps and the Sensations Oven Chicken and Thyme Crisps. Now, the Sensations have dairy in and the Tesco's ones don't. Now, bear in mind that manufacturers change their products all the time. So what we're telling you today is only relevant as of today. So always, always double check the labels. Just because we've said that these products are free of dairy as they are today, please always check, because manufacturers have a horrible habit of changing things very unexpectedly. And Tanya, you wanted to point out these, which I think is an excellent example of some unexpected products.
Yeah, so people would think butter puffs contain butter. They actually don't. People think they can't have milkshake or hot chocolate. Actually, this is a chocolate flavoured powder that you mix with dairy-free milk. There's no milk in it. There's no dairy products in it. And you can have this as a hot chocolate or a milkshake. So that's a really nice thing to have. But be warned that most Bourbon creams actually are dairy-free. They just happen to be dairy-free. However, the Fox's ones underneath do have dairy in. So although we get a bit ahead of ourselves, all excited and think there are things we can have, remember, read the label every time, and you won't slip up and have something that contains dairy by mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Nesquik is a good example of dairy-free, and you use that yourself as a dairy allergic patient. But other chocolate drinks might have dairy in, so always, as you said, read the label.
Absolutely.
So looking at cooking tips, a lot of people want recipes and perhaps websites and resources where they can go and get information. What would be your advice on that? What about recipes? Would you try new ones, adapt old ones? How would you work it?
I think that, firstly, is just try adapting your usual recipes. So if you're making a fish pie, for example, with a creamy sauce, make the creamy sauce dairy-free and make your usual fish pie. But as you move on and you get more confident with cooking dairy-free and realise that it tastes delicious anyway and tastes the same, you can try new recipes. And I would just say start with something simple. And there's lots of recipes available on the internet. Just double check all the ingredients in those and find simple recipes to start with that you can have. And then you can, as your confidence builds, then you can try more complicated recipes.
What about things like Facebook? Because I think I remember you saying that you found some of the Facebook sites extremely useful for recipes. Is that correct?
Yes, I think social media, Instagram, Facebook, they've all got links where you can just join sites with dairy-free recipes and get cooking tips from other people.
So use it for the recipes.
Absolutely.
Be very aware that the advice, if they're giving health and allergy advice out, that may not be reliable, but use it as a recipe tool. And I think that's, very much the case with things like Instagram now, where you've got Instagram influencers, for instance, who may have excellent recipes, but they're also giving out advice on allergy, which is really not always reliable. And I think you've got to be very aware of that. So I think what you're saying, Tanya, is basically use the recipes, just be aware of any health advice they give. What about the taste? Because a lot of patients say to me, oh God, the cheese, the soya cheese tastes horrible, or the milk tastes horrible. Particularly a few years ago, they really found the taste wasn't pleasant. What would you say about the taste now?
I would say the taste has changed completely. The products have changed completely, and everybody wants to enjoy. And people making these products want you to enjoy their product. And there's so many different products out there. So if you don't like one, try another. But generally, you'd be very surprised and pleased to see how good the products are.
And there's a lot more competition now, isn't there, I guess, for people to buy products?
They're so easy to get hold of, accessible everywhere. The prices are much cheaper. And because of the competition, there's just lots of products and the product companies actually have recipes using their products on the website, on their own website for that product. So oat-based products, soya-based products, nut-based products, vegan products, all of these dairy alternatives are suddenly all this competition, and it's brilliant because suddenly we've got, 1 is really good products, 2 added nutrition to a lot of the products, and 3 recipes. So it's really, really good.
So, in times before, how many, you might have had the 1 cheese product available, dairy-free cheese product. Now, how many cheese products do you think roughly are available on the market?
Over 50.
Really, my word. So we've really accessible. You've got all these companies wanting them, they want you to buy their product. They're going to be really working hard on making the
The
taste.
companies have been wonderful, I have to say. The product, they even grate the cheese for you and sell it in a bag already grated, you know, fantastic.
And what about the nutritional content of these products? Because some patients worry that they aren't getting enough calcium or they're not getting enough nutrition in the dairy-free products. What would you say about that? Because I know that, for instance, some of the organic milks historically haven't had calcium added.
Yes, some of the products, for example, don't have protein or don't have calcium. There's not many that don't, but they are there. So do check the nutrition information. However, I would say that some products, if you really, really enjoy them, even if they don't give you the nutrition that you need, get that nutrition from another source and just enjoy that product. And yes, the point about the milks, there used to be no dairy-free milk at all that you could buy that had any calcium added if it was organic. The organic milks just didn't have added calcium, but now a few of the products are beginning to have added calcium. So you do need to check the ingredients of those. And lots of them are adding iodine and other nutrients to them as well.
And we've added on our further information handout section, we've added a calcium information sheet from the British Dietetics Association, which tells you about the amount of calcium you need in your diet. So if you want to have that information, please feel free to download it from the further information handout section. So looking at eating food prepared by others. So, and this could come into things like travel. Maybe you're traveling for work, or you're going on holiday, or you're traveling across the country to go from one place to the next. What sort of tips would you give for that, Tanya?
I would say that when you're traveling, if it's for work, you don't want to be ill. If it's for a holiday, you don't want to be ill. You want to relax, you want to enjoy yourself and have a nice time if you're traveling for holidays. Communicating your needs, speaking to people beforehand, just making sure that you set the scene almost. It's like making sure everything's okay before you go on your holiday or your travels.
And taking food in the hold luggage, so the luggage that gets stowed at the bottom of an aircraft. Do people need letters to get permission to put food in their suitcase?
No, you don't. Not if it's going in the hold. If you're carrying it as hand luggage and you want to take something with you, you basically probably won't be able to. So it's better not to. Eat before you fly if you're going on a plane. All the other food that you want to take with you on holiday abroad, put it in the suitcase in the hold. You don't need a letter.
So when you're traveling, so for instance, you're going to stay in a hotel or a B&B, or you're staying with people, I would always recommend that people email or phone ahead and explain their dietary needs well in advance. And so that people know what to expect when you come there. And that would be the same for eating out. So if you're going to a restaurant or a bar, or you're going to be eating out, or even socializing with friends, making sure that you've let people know what it is that you need. Now, I know some people, particularly with friends, find that very awkward because they feel like they're being annoying or making it hard for the friend who's cooking. But it is so important that you either let people know or take your own food with you. Would you agree with that, Tanya?
I would definitely agree. And particularly if you're going to a country where English isn't their first language, you do need to definitely contact them and make sure everything is really, really clear about what you think.
I think if there's something that's really important to you and that you really feel you need and is going to make a big difference to your time away, then it is definitely worth packing that and not assuming you're going to be able to get it at the other end. Would you think so?
Absolutely. And if you have a bit too much of that food, does it really matter if they have got it on sale when you're there? It doesn't matter. But actually, it does matter if you haven't got that food with you and you really want it, and it makes a big difference.
And hospitals. So is there a way that you can let people know in advance of arriving in hospital?
You can speak with the nursing staff or the doctor, and they can get the dietitian to come and see you. But lots of menus now are coded vegan or dairy free anyway. So just see when you're at the hospital what is appropriate for you.
Okay. And actually that leads very nicely onto the next slide, where we look at easy mistakes. We're understanding free from and understanding difference between lactose free and dairy free. So starting with understanding free from, do you want to give us a bit of detail around that?
Yeah, so quite often people will say, oh, this free from food, I had a problem with it, hurt my tummy and I don't know why. And actually that gluten-free pizza did have dairy, cow's milk, cheese on top. And so free from doesn't mean it's free from everything. It means it's only free from the things it's labelled as free from. So you never presume anything. It kind of works both ways as well. Some people will buy bread in the free from range thinking, oh, well, that's dairy free, when they could be having many of the packaged supermarket breads anyway, which are much cheaper and much probably nicer as well. So it's use them in the correct way. The free from range is there to expand your diet and help you with dairy alternatives.
Now, this is the second one is a really common mistake that people make, the difference between lactose-free and dairy-free. Now, the important thing about lactose is the sugar in milk, and dairy-free means you're avoiding the protein in milk. So there are two different types of diet. Now, with lactose-free, if you're avoiding the sugar, all you need to have is ordinary cow's milk that's had the lactose taken out or much reduced. You don't need dairy-free. So somebody on a lactose-free diet can still have cow's milk, but they just have to have lactose-free cow's milk. Now, somebody on a dairy-free diet who's trying to avoid the protein can't have anything from a cow or a sheep or a goat, nothing from a mammal. They need plant-based dairy-free because that's got no animal protein in it. So they're two completely different types of diet. So if you're on a dairy-free diet, as you would be if you're looking at watching this webinar, then you should not be using the lactose-free products. They are not suitable because they still have cow's milk protein in.
I think the confusion comes is when people go shopping and they look at all the dairy-free yogurts and milks. Right next to them is all the lactose-free products in the same shelf quite often. And it confuses people and they presume that those products are okay. So they're not okay.
Yes, Tanya, I completely agree. It can be extremely confusing in the supermarket when you're looking for dairy-free products and the lactose-free products are quite close to them. One of the questions we get asked a lot by patients is about calcium requirements. And we've got on the screen here a list of the different calcium requirements. And I think it's really important to know that vitamin D is required for the absorption of calcium. Most of our vitamin D is made from the action of sunlight on our skin. So between April and September, when you go outside for about 15 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week, between about 11 and 3, you should get enough vitamin D, presuming you haven't covered yourself in sunscreen. But all adults and children over the age of 1 should consider taking a daily supplement containing about 10 micrograms of vitamin D, especially during the autumn and winter months. A daily supplement is recommended all year round for those who are at risk of low vitamin D, and that includes pregnant and breastfeeding women, babies and young children, people aged 65, and any people with darker skin who may be not exposed to so much sunlight. So what other foods are there that can actually give you calcium? Well, you can have calcium-enriched dairy alternatives. So some of the dairy alternative milks and yogurts and desserts and cheese, etc., will often have calcium in there. Things like soybean curd or tofu are high in calcium. And then you've got calcium fortified cereals and breads, for instance. And things like tinned sardines and pilchards and salmon with the bones are also high in calcium. What we've included with this webinar in the further information handout section is a food fact sheet on calcium from the British Dietetics Association, and that will give you much more information. But one area I really want to point out is that some foods like spinach, dried fruit, beans, seeds and nuts are not actually good sources of calcium due to their oxalate and phytate content, which actually prevents the full absorption of the calcium from those foods. So I would underline that you mustn't rely on these types of foods for your main sources of calcium. So some frequently asked questions, and I think we've really covered this first one. Can I eat goat, sheep, buffalo products? Well, as we said before, any dairy from a mammal is out. So any dairy from an animal is out.
But we're not saying you can't have the meat of those animals. You can. It's just the milk products from them. Along with the other misconception that people think eggs are dairy, and they're not. Eggs are not dairy.
If you're on a dairy-free diet, you can still eat eggs unless you've been advised not to for some reason. Am I allergic to dairy if I can tolerate small amounts? That's a very good question.
It's a good question.
I think it's a very common misconception that allergy means you can never have even the tiniest amount. Now, there are different types of allergy, and we've said that this webinar is not suitable for people who have anaphylaxis or react to very trace amounts or tiny amounts of dairy. This is not suitable for them. But everybody else who needs to be on a dairy-free diet, then yes, it is very possible to have dairy allergy where you can get away with very small amounts, very well cooked small amounts, but you can't get away with the larger amounts. So it's a misconception. People tend to say, oh, well, that's impossible. You can't possibly have an allergy if you can tolerate tiny amounts. Well, that just is not the case. There are different types of food allergy. Would you agree with that, Tanya?
I would, but of course, what we're not encouraging people to do who have been quite strict to suddenly start eating dairy without any advice from a healthcare professional. But yes, I would agree with that. There are different degrees of how allergic you are to milk.
And what about taking vitamin mineral supplements? We touched on calcium, for instance, earlier, and we've got the sheet that people can download with this webinar on calcium advice. Are there other vitamins and minerals that you would recommend?
I think that the most important thing is that everybody endeavours to follow a balanced, nutritious diet. And it's much better to get your vitamins and minerals from food. And for example, a dairy-free diet often is low in iodine. But if you eat a lot of fish, then actually you don't need the iodine that would have come from the milk. So I think it's looking at the overall balance of the diet. So in terms of the vitamin and mineral supplements, if they're needed, if somebody's very fussy with food or has a hectic lifestyle and they know they don't eat properly, then it might be useful for them to take vitamin and mineral supplements. An A to Z vitamin and mineral supplement, for example, would cover all bases to make sure that they're not missing out on any micronutrients. Ultimately, we're aiming to have a balanced diet, and if we're replacing dairy with dairy alternatives that are nutritious, there's no reason at all why we would be low on any nutrients. And in fact, following a special diet often gives people a more balanced diet because they're more aware that they need to make more of an effort.
And interestingly, I find with a lot of patients, they sort of feel they have to give up processed or ready-made meals because they need to be so sure that they're dairy-free. So they end up eating a lot more fresh ingredients, home-cooked ingredients, which means that their food is a lot healthier anyway and more nutritious. So actually, sometimes being on these diets, as you quite rightly said, can mean a better quality diet. Finally, this is one that you particularly mentioned. How do I help others understand why I can't eat the same as them? And I'm sure, Tanya, you come across this the whole time as somebody who can't eat dairy and eggs. So how would you help advise people?
I think try and keep things positive and just explain to people what would happen if you had dairy and how easy it is to manage your diet and how easy it is to use replacement foods and how you can have lovely recipes and still make a lemon drizzle cake. Give it in a positive light and say, well, this can happen. However, I can do this, this, and this, and it makes my life really easy. And I think if you can convey that and show people that you can do it and it's not a problem, then it's not a problem for them either. They don't find it a problem.
And taking things with you, presumably in that scenario, if you are going to see a friend, I think we mentioned this earlier, and you think they are very nervous that they might do something wrong, to take your own food so that you can sit around the table, eat quite happily with everybody else with a glass of wine or a drink and chat away and socialise, but you've brought your own food. They're not then stressed that they've got to cook you something, but you're still part of the whole social event. And I think that's really important, that you don't stop going out and you don't stop socializing and seeing your friends just because you're on a dairy-free diet. If it means you take your own food, that's fine. And sometimes restaurants, if they particularly feel they might not be able to cater for you, if you're going with a large group of people and you warn them, you say, please, can I come along? Is it okay if I just have a drink, but I bring my own food? Most of them will be absolutely fine with that. So don't be afraid to bring your own things with you.
Absolutely. I think communicating, it's all about communicating and working out what works for you and other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to say thank you very much, Tanya. It's been incredibly useful having you talk us through this, because I know a lot of people find a dairy-free diet quite daunting. And I think the overriding feeling you've given me from doing this is that it's all about having a positive outlook, and that nowadays there are so many more products around that it makes following a diet like this so much simpler and much more tasty than it ever used to be. And it's really a case of reading the labels, just constantly reading the labels, checking manufacturers don't change their ingredients, and just being aware and taking control of the situation yourself, but in a positive way. How would you summarize?
Absolutely, I totally agree. And I think it's fantastic that you've made this webinar today, and we can share this with everybody else and spread the word.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for making the time. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you again in the future. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Bye-bye.